Welcome to Making Stuff, the podcast about people who make something out of nothing. I'm your host, Eliza Tebow, a musician and journalist who spent years producing creative projects from scratch and paying attention to how things actually get built. On today's episode, we're sitting down with Silas Fransen, an art history major at George Mason University, and LaNitra Berger, associate professor of history and art history, as well as the director of African and African American studies at Mason. Both are behind a new exhibit at the university called Fountain of Truth. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
So first, I'd love if both of you could provide a bit of your background in the visual arts, including how you decided to pursue it at the collegiate level, of course, as a student and as a professor. So Silas, if we could start with you.
Yeah, I've always been interested in art. I've painted or drawn ever since I was a little kid. But the art history side came when I took a class at community college. I thought I was going to get a history credit out of it. I didn't, but I fell in love with the course anyway. And so then I became obsessed and I took every class I could at George Mason and made it my major.
And do you have any specific focus area or just all art history is of interest?
I'm really between like the medieval period and going more modern or contemporary.
Okay.
So I haven't picked between those two yet, but it's between those.
Awesome. And Professor Berger, how about you?
So I have been interested in museums since I was a little kid. I grew up in San Bernardino, California, which is about an hour outside of Los Angeles. And I used to go to museums all the time. I visited the Norton Simon Museum and the Getty Museum and the LA County Museum. And being able to see all of that amazing and interesting artwork as a kid really ignited my interest in art history. And I went to college and majored in art history, studied abroad in Paris, and that's when I knew I was hooked. I really wanted to be an art historian. So I went to graduate school, became an art historian, and eventually got a job at George Mason University in the history and art history department. And my area of specialty is arts of the African and Jewish diasporas. So I teach classes on African American art history and African art history and Black Jewish relations. And last spring, I taught a class called the Black Renaissance in America, and Silas was in that class. So we had a really fun semester exploring the art of the 20th century in African American art history. And at the end of the class, usually students say, "Hey, that was fun. Peace out. I'll see you later." But Silas emailed me and said that he was interested in doing a project where he got funding from the Oscar division, which is a special division at George Mason that specifically funds students to do research. And so Silas wanted to curate an exhibition and asked me if I would be his mentor. And that was very flattering and exciting for me because I love museums and I love curating. So I was really excited to dive right in.
Fantastic. Okay, so that sounds like the impetus for the exhibit that we're talking about today. So Fountain of Truth, could you, either of you share with the listeners what it's about and how you selected the topic? Because, you know, if you're creating an exhibit, it could be about just about anything.
So it's called Fountain of Truth, Women's Perspectives on Aging. So the exhibit is really asking these women artists to come forward and talk about their experiences with aging or how they feel about aging. And I got the idea for the exhibit when I was taking Dr. Angelina Ho's class, Baroque Renaissance, and Northern Baroque class. And she just offhandedly mentioned this paper called Why Are There No Old Women in Heaven? And I couldn't stop thinking about this paper, even though I hadn't read it yet. And so I asked her to give me the information for it, and I tracked it down. And I read it, and then I still couldn't stop thinking about it. I think it was like 3 days, and I couldn't stop thinking about this paper. And that's when I knew I had to do something with it. And I had heard about Oxford my first semester, and I had an idea that I wanted to do a project with them, but I didn't know what it was yet until I read this paper.
Could you kind of summarize the paper? I mean, that's a very intriguing title. It's why are there no old women in heaven? Why are there no aging women in heaven? What was that?
Why are there no old women in heaven?
Yeah, I'd love to know.
So it's looking at the depictions of saints, particularly women saints, and pointing out that all the women are very young in appearance, despite the fact that some of them were older when they they were older when they found like the miracle or performed their miracle that made them a saint. Unlike older men, such as Saint Peter, I think she uses for an example in it. But there's Saint Helen, who I think she finds the cross. It's been a little while since I read the paper, but she finds the cross when she's in her 70s, and she's always depicted very young. The paper also talks about Mary and her depiction of being very young, linking it to this idea that pops up during the Renaissance of women that are virtuous appearing younger for longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so their youth gets tied to their chastity. And then later it kind of becomes more of a demonization of older women as they are seen as the opposite to that. So they become like symbolisms of lust and envy in art.
So is the argument that as women age and, perhaps get beyond childbearing age, that they no longer have value?
I don't think the paper's arguing that. I think it's more of explaining this history of how this kind of happened and, answering the question of like, why are these women depicted younger than they really are when they perform miracles? Yeah.
Okay. And what about that paper spoke to you? Like, why do you think it was so sticky for you? Because you said you were thinking about it for days.
Yeah, I'm not sure why exactly it stuck with me. I think it explained the source of something that I had seen throughout my life of, a lot of older women in my life complaining about becoming older or, in media, older women are not depicted in the best light. And there's no female older mentor characters, but there's all these male mentor characters. And so I think it just explained the source of something that I had seen my whole life. And I've seen it impact people in their daily life too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then LaNitra, so what's your role when Silas comes to you and says, okay, I've got this idea, I've got this funding, let's do this. How do you support his work?
Yeah, so I'll back up for a second and say that years ago, when I first came to Mason 16 years ago, my job was to run a student faculty research program. And that program is what eventually became the Oscar office. So George Mason invested a lot of money into programs and resources to help students do these types of projects. So I had spent a lot of time on the administrative side of it, and I've advised one other student on an Oscar project, and I loved it. So these projects are student driven, so you have to wait for the students to come to you to be able to help them. So I was thrilled that Silas came to me and said, I have this idea. It was all his idea, all his thinking. Would you mentor me on the curatorial side of it? So I'm actually pretty new to this particular topic as well. And I wanted to learn more about it too. So it worked out that Silas had the idea and the vision for the project. And my role was to help shape more of the reading and the thinking and the thought process of how do you actually create an exhibition based on a scholarly idea.
So, before you proceeded and put this all together, did you feel that the exhibit was timely in a way, Silas? I read something like 70% or more than 70% of women over 50 feel like pressured by media in terms of beauty standards that they just can't possibly rise to. Did you feel like this is the time to tell this story?
I think so. I think it was well timed, but also I think this has been a problem for a very long time. As the paper talks about, it's at least since the Renaissance.
Right.
So I think any time is the time we should be talking about this.
Yeah, goes back centuries, if not millennia. So here on Making Stuff, we love to talk about how you make what you make. So could you both sort of walk us through the process from, okay, an idea was sparked and then got the funding, and then what happens between that and actually having a physical exhibit that people can walk through and learn from?
Making an exhibit is literally taking an empty room and turning it into something magical and transformational and thought-provoking. And that's why being a curator is so cool. You get to take this empty space and build something that allows people to come away just completely transformed emotionally and physically by what they see. The challenge with that, though, is the same thing that makes it so cool, is that you have to really figure out how to use your space effectively. And that involves a lot more math than art historians want to think about. It involves building relationships with artists and understanding what their vision is for their work. And it involves a lot of behind the scenes logistics and construction. So it's you're literally making something out of nothing. And so I'll turn over to Silas so you can tell more about like how we first started thinking through the space concerns and how we were going to organize this kind of exhibition.
Yeah, for the layout of the museum, I created a Google Slides document and I just put one image per slide to indicate the organization I wanted it to be. And then I took that long list of slides and I formed them into one Google slide where I just kind of listed them out around the room. I my brain doesn't work the way that I could just measure it. And so that's how I did the layout of it. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Well, yeah, I think that's a key component. But taking a step back, and I should mention this exhibit is currently going through April 11th, I believe, and then the 12th is an artist panel, and then followed by a musical performance that I will actually be in. But it's at the Hilton Performing Arts Center in Manassas, which is part of the Mason campus.
That's
Mason
right.
has several campuses.
Yeah, so Mason has three campuses in the United States, and it has an office called Mason Exhibitions. And so Mason Exhibitions manages a bunch of really cool art spaces, both on our campuses and in the community. So this is actually an art space that's in the lobby of the Hilton Performing Arts Center. So if people are going to the Hilton Arts Center for a performance, they can actually go upstairs and visit this exhibition and look at what the art is in the lobby.
Which is great because you have, the foot traffic. In addition to people who are explicitly coming to see the exhibit, you have people who, sort of stumble on it and get to experience it as well. So kind of before we even get to the mechanics of the exhibit layout, how did you find the artists who are featured?
So we sent out a call for art where I listed the general theme of the exhibit and some follow-up questions for it. And we sent them to galleries. We sent them to faculty on George Mason and some other organizations within George Mason. And I believe
The art world is very interconnected, but in some ways it's still very segregated by region, by race, by opportunity. And so I love that Silas really wanted to have a show that represented a variety of different perspectives on aging, since aging is a cultural construct as well. So we really tried to send out our call for artwork to a lot of different communities so that we could try to get as many diverse perspectives as possible.
So you have artists from different backgrounds and also representing different ages as well?
Yes.
Very cool. Okay, so you had your artists and then they submit selections and there's a whole process by which you sort of narrow the work down, and walk us through that as well.
I think we actually didn't end up needing to reject anybody, but I think I looked at the view of the art and then I looked through the artist statements, and each one was just so beautifully written as well. I think that was a huge push for me to accept the art too.
Great.
And just the new insight they brought to the themes that I had drafted out.
You see the word curate a lot in public culture these days. People talk about curated.
Everything's curated.
And everything's curated. But really the essence of what curators do is they are arbiters of taste and quality. And to be able to make those types of selections that Silas made requires that you have an understanding of what is quality artwork, what is depth, what is, how closely does this speak to the themes that Silas had established as the scholar and the curator. And it's those decisions that are really reflected in the exhibition. We had a variety of artists from different backgrounds, And their statements about how they felt their work spoke to the theme were very poignant and very relevant. So we were lucky that we had such great submissions, but we also had to really evaluate those submissions and make sure that they spoke to each other, that they were in conversation with each other in the exhibition, and also that they spoke to these bigger themes.
Yeah, how does it typically work when you're curating an exhibit? Let's say you have far more submissions than you have the ability to show. Art is a very subjective thing. You might have multiple people on a committee. How does everyone get together? I mean, is there a rubric? Like, how are people evaluating yes or no if everything has its own, merits?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It varies a lot by institution and by context, but in general, with a juried show, that's usually the term that you would use for an art show where there's an actual panel or jury of people who are somewhat experts or well versed in that particular area. And so they have some set of criteria or rubric that they use that usually connects to the quality of the artwork, the adherence to the specified theme. The size constraints really matter. So there could be a really fantastic piece of artwork, but if it doesn't fit in the space, it simply can't go in. So these juries take all of those factors into account to make their decisions. And so unfortunately, a lot of times there's wonderful artwork that just can't be shown in a specific exhibition. And, artists have to constantly try and submit their work to lots of different types of shows so that they increase their chances of getting accepted.
So once you had selected your artwork and you have your space, did you feel, today with so much that's interactive and digitized and condensed, like, do you feel pressure to try to make an exhibit more interactive and more engaging? Or is there still a market for the traditional kind of more static art exhibit where, there's a gallery and you walk through it and you can appreciate 2D art without, a bunch of bells and whistles?
I can address that. And then Silas, please feel free to chime in. Writing for museums and panels has been that genre has always been one that speaks to a very specific audience of people. So writing for the general public automatically means that the language has to be tailored to a more general audience. The length of the writing has to be condensed. And Silas did a lot of work with reading the artist statements and thinking about how to standardize them. So that's something that museums have been doing for a very long time. And that's partially why it's possible for two people of different ages or backgrounds can both go to the same museum and come away with something from the exhibit. But as you said, it is there is still a pull to be catchy. People's attention spans are unfortunately getting shorter and shorter. So you do want something that is really going to pull the reader in and grab their attention. And I think that's why we decided to let the artists speak for themselves. That's one of the reasons why we decided to do that, because the artists spoke so eloquently and succinctly on their own about their work and how it relates to aging, that we felt that that was a draw to the exhibition, that people would get to come and hear these artists, even if they're not there on April 12th or they never meet these artists in person, they get to hear their words. Silas, what else do you want to add about that?
I definitely agree with all that. I think that's also why we chose the name the way that we did. I think it added a lot of intrigue to it when it's perspectives on aging, gives you a hint of what you're looking for. I think we also were really lucky with the space that it didn't, I feel like, require a lot of extra engagement, as it's already where a lot of people are walking through. And I was there the other day and I did see people when they left there for the intermission that they stopped and looked at the art for some time, which was really fun to see as a curator.
Yeah, that's great.
But I think the space also helped.
So what have some of the challenges been since the exhibit opened? Anything sort of pop up that, we didn't foresee this problem?
the next challenge, I think, once it opened, was just planning the artist panel and getting that going and organizing everything for that. Has been the next challenge once it opened.
So things have been pretty smooth sailing with the process overall.
I think so. Yeah, I would say so. Although it's my first time doing it, so
You have nothing to compare
everything's
it to. It's
very
like everything's
daunting.
relative. It's
Yeah.
the hardest and the easiest exhibit that you've ever put together.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to give a shout out to Jeff Kenny, who is the associate curator of Mason Exhibitions. Jeff is the man behind the shows. He's the person who constructs the exhibits and helps us find spaces and troubleshoot. And so these spaces are usually booked years in advance. And I came to Jeff when Silas wanted to do this project and said, is there any opening in the next year? We will take any space available. And Jeff made space for us in the Hilton Arts Center. And I feel like Jeff's commitment to students learning how to curate is so strong and so admirable because he found the space and we went with it. It was a great opportunity. I hope that anybody listening will at least have a chance to visit this beautiful exhibition before it closes next week. But if not, there's a few pictures where you can see that there are some challenges with the actual space. For example, the architecture of the entryway is curved. And so that's kind of challenging to hang two-dimensional works on a curved space. And one of the walls is a metal backing, and it's got some lines on it. And that affects how you see the artwork because it's sort of reflecting off of the back. And, you know, the shape of the artwork is a little bit different than the curvature and the size of the wall. So all of those things make the experience very unique because if you were to hang the same show in another space, people would receive it differently. But these were challenges that Jeff worked with Silas on thinking about size, what can go where. Some works just wouldn't really work well against a metal wall, and they had to be moved to another wall. So being a curator is always like solving a puzzle because you have to take the artwork that you've been given and take the space that you've been given and figure out how to make everything work together.
Yeah. LaNitra, have you ever worked on an exhibit that was traveling? So you've got the same artwork and you show it here, and now you're going to move it to a totally different location. I'm just curious whether that impacts the viewer experience, or it almost feels like a different exhibit when the artwork is in a different space.
Yes. So I taught a curating class for students almost 2 years ago now. And in that class, the students were working with South African prints, and they were using the university's art gallery for that. So that's a very traditional gallery space. It's rectangular, it has movable walls. And the exhibition was so successful and exciting that the show, when it finished, moved from that gallery to Mason's Arlington Gallery. And so that gallery is also situated as a traditional art gallery, but the dimensions are different. The movable wall looks different. The lighting is different. And so the students were the ones who actually made that transition. I guided them through the process, but they were the ones who had to look at the artwork, look at what was the dimensions of the new space, and think about how they were going to display the work in a different order and in a different way. And for me, I love teaching. I love working with students. And so being able to teach curating to students is like the best thing ever for me. So watching them solve the puzzle and watching them do the curator's math was really fun for me because in both places, the exhibition was just stunning. And it was different in each place, and people responded to it differently. And that was exciting to see how it traveled from one space to another.
Yeah. Speaking of responses, what feedback have you received so far, Silas, from viewers or visitors?
I haven't heard that much from viewers. I have people that I've taken personally. Like I took my older sister one day, and I think she really loved it. She said that she ended up getting teary-eyed at one point because it impacted her so much. And yeah, I think everyone I've taken has really loved it though. Or maybe they're just nice, but I think it's a really good exhibit.
Great. Great. Anything to add, LaNitra? I don't know if you're on the receiving end of feedback as well or not.
The challenge of this space is that it is in Manassas, which is about an hour from our main university campus in Fairfax. So, unlike other shows where I go through the gallery almost every day and do a curator's walkthrough, I'm not really close to that space. What I can say though is that this, because of the way the space is used, when they do pre-theater discussions, they do those in that gallery space. So one of the artists who's exhibiting, her name is Cheryl Edwards, she was looking on Instagram and saw her artwork on Instagram because it was in the background of this pre-theater talk. And Cheryl is an accomplished, very well-known curator and artist herself, and she was still really excited to see her work in that kind of context. So that kind of information is priceless because the artists are genuinely excited to share their work in any public venue. And so when they get excited, I get excited.
Yeah. Which kind of goes to promoting exhibits these days. Did you find yourselves sending out mailers or just sort of making social media posts, emails? What were the different methods that you used to get the word out?
We used mailers. We used emails, especially for this upcoming panel. We've done a huge marketing push for this upcoming artist panel. I've been sending out a lot of emails and texts to people about it. And yeah, so we have done some marketing for it.
Right.
And I know the Hilton and Mason Exhibits team has also done a lot of marketing for us as well, which has been really fantastic.
Awesome.
I'm a firm believer that when you do something cool like what Silas has done, you need to go on the circuit. So podcasts are a really good way to talk about what you've done and why people should see it. And I know that the exhibit closes on Saturday, but there is still going to be a website on the Mason exhibition site. So for anybody who listens to this podcast after the exhibition closes, you can still get a flavor for the exhibition on the website.
Great. And so would that just be like Googling Mason exhibitions or George Mason University exhibitions?
MasonExhibitions.org, I believe, is the website, and I'll send it to Eliza for the show notes as well.
Fantastic. Is there anything I didn't ask about when it comes to this exhibit that either of you wanted to mention, whether it's about the process of creating it or the content itself and the resonance of the topic?
I have one other thing to add, which is how we settled on the title of the exhibition. So I've known Eliza for 14 years, since our kids were babies. And I've always admired Eliza as a writer, as a performer, as a mom, as a friend. Like everything that she does is just magical. And so I had this phenomenal opportunity to travel with Eliza to Austin last year for her bachelorette party. And it was my first bachelorette party, so I was really excited about that. And my first one and my first time in Austin. So I was just in seventh heaven, just taking it all in. And Eliza mentioned during the trip that she had just dropped a single, a performance of a song called Fountain of Youth. And I immediately listened to it, and Silas and I were right in the throes of trying to conceptualize the exhibition and get it off the ground. And there was just something about the lyrics and the way that Eliza was singing that really spoke to me in that moment. And it just brought everything together, that this type of meditation from a woman who's a mom and a performer and trying to define herself at midlife, that this was like a really good way of understanding and thinking about aging at a lot of different levels. And so when I heard the song, the idea of calling the exhibition Fountain of Truth came to me, because I felt like women are telling so much truth all the time about their own personal experiences with aging. and they're not always listened to. A lot of times they're ignored and gaslit. And I just felt like the song really spoke to what Silas and I were trying to do in the moment. And I was so happy that Eliza was interested in providing a photograph and is going to perform the song, because it really is the connector of all the ideas and has really helped me think about aging at different levels.
Thank you so much, LaNitra. I appreciate all your kind words and your friendship, of course, and just the opportunity to be part of this exhibit. This is something that definitely speaks to me. Just the challenges of embracing your age in our society. It's difficult, but we're doing it. We're working on it. Well, that's it for this episode of Making Stuff. If you found this conversation engaging and inspiring, you can find more episodes and resources at makingstuffpodcast.com. There, you can also buy us a virtual coffee so we can keep the episodes coming. Thanks so much to our guests, Silas Fransen and LaNitra Berger. And thank you for listening.